Alastair, when it comes to the security guarantees to Ukraine, we know that there is some sort of differences between the European party and the American party. They don't feel the same. How do you see the security, the most important elements for the security guarantees for Ukraine, and that would be acceptable somehow? Russia can get along with those terms. Do you feel that would happen with the current situation and with considering Zelensky as the president of Ukraine? Is that possible with Zelensky, or there has to be some sort of drastic changes in the government in Ukraine to achieve that?
Well, first of all, Russia has, you know, which has really a veto over what it will accept or not accept. I mean, it's fine for Europeans to say, well, we're going to put in European troops as peacekeepers. But Russia's made it quite clear that if they are done without Russian agreement, they will be treated as enemy fighters and killed. So that's why the Europeans are so desperate to have if you like, backing from the United States. Why then are they putting in ineffectual numbers of troops? I mean, because Europe can probably bring together perhaps at most 25, 30,000 troops. But the contact line is nearly 2,000 kilometers long. And, you know, that requires vastly more troops than that to sort of try and monitor it at the best time. What they're doing is they're trying to put in tripwires that, you know, if even either that Russia will cause it to trip or they will fake a trip of the tripwires. And then they will say in America, no, Article 5, you've got to come in. NATO Article 5, we're under, you've got to come in and you've got to deal with that. And, you know, Trump and his team sees the ambush and says, no, thank you, no American boots on the ground. I'm president and I'm saying it. No American boots will go in, which means that they're not getting backed up. So, you know, where has all this come from? I mean, first of all, I think you have to look back, you have to go back to the agreement, the Istanbul in April 22 agreement. And that had security guarantees in it. It provided for security guarantees for Ukraine. No one mentions that in Europe, of course, because the security guarantees were not coming from NATO states, it was coming from non-NATO states. China was going to be a guarantor. Russia itself was going to be a guarantor. Probably India would have been a guarantor. Who else? I don't know. But there would have been other guarantors of, if you like, that. And that the guarantors would also oversee the level of troops numbers that Ukraine had, the type of weapons they had, and would have a veto power over any treaties that they engage in with other states, foreign states. So that's the type of security guarantees that the Russians are thinking of. And I think Trump has been told that, what they think, by Putin probably. And, you know, he sees this as not unreasonable. He knows that if NATO goes in, then, you know, his MAGA team will go nuts. They'll say we're on the road to World War III. So he doesn't want a NATO war against Russia. And if China's willing to do this and other states are willing to do this, to provide some sort of security guarantees, what's wrong with that? So I think that what we hear, all that we've been hearing about security guarantees, and Witkoff comes back and says the Russians are open to these things. I think the Americans are spinning it. I mean, I don't think that, we know that the Russians haven't suggested that. Land swaps, how could there be land swaps of the four within those four oblasts? Because it's in the treaty, it's in the constitution. They're constitutionally now part of Russia. And the wording of that actually says the residents of those four oblasts are forever Russian. That's what it says in the actual act that brought them into the constitution. So, I mean, even if Putin wanted to, he can't change that. It would have to go through a whole process in the constitutional court, etc. So this is really, I think, something that the Europeans are heaving at as hard as they can to get some sort of the Trump to agree to having French or British troops on the ground. But first of all, it doesn't make much sense because they say, oh well, our troops will be far back, but Russia has said very clearly, we don't care where you are in Ukraine. If you're in Ukraine, we will kill you. So, I mean, it's not going to, I don't think it's going to work. I've seen no sign during this period of any walking back by Russia of any of the commitments they made on 14th of June when Putin spoke at the foreign ministry in Russia, and he laid out the conditions for ceasefires, and he laid out the aims of Russia, and he laid out the conditions for also for, if you like, denuclearization and also demilitarization of the armed forces. And then we hear also other stories. All of these, this is what I mean by noise. The whole thing is being filled. And all of the noise is coming from American sources who may be well inclined or not well inclined towards an agreement coming out of this. So we hear that, they should have had guarantees. They had guarantees because Ukraine gave up its nuclear weapons in return for guarantees from the West. Nonsense. They didn't give up any nuclear weapons, Ukraine. Those were Soviet weapons, and the Soviets withdrew them. That's all. There was no Ukrainian nuclear weapons given up to anyone. They were just withdrawn. So, of course, there weren't any security guarantees in respect to its giving up of nuclear weapons. Nonsense. So, I mean, there's a lot of this noise and trying to sort of shape American policy and American public perceptions of what is possible. And Trump has to deal with that. And one of the ways he does it is very frustrating, I think, is, as I say, to fill the information space with, sort of things that sound one way and then sound differently the next day. And everyone is a little bit uncertain. But you notice, and I think this is what, confirms me in my sense of what I've been relating to you, is, the Russians are very careful. They don't go out and contradict Trump every time he makes a statement here or a silly statement there. They don't. They do lay very occasionally a very clear statement. There will be no NATO forces in Ukraine, such as that. But they don't, try and sort of score points or say anything. In fact, the reverse. They stay quiet. This is the other part of the deal. Putin takes responsibility for forcing an outcome, and Trump tries to sort of manage the Western sphere, if he can. I mean, it's by no means certain. There are so many things against him, and these things like Epstein don't go away. They keep coming back. And we're told they're going to come back after Labor Day in America with, other activities trying to bring Epstein back to the forefront. And he's very frustrated. Trump is very clearly very frustrated. And I think we hear from someone who was talking to those in the West Wing. They said, he just feels, he didn't want to get back into the Ukraine thing because it's intractable. But he said, I've got to do this. I'm going to do this. I have to give something to the MAGA people. I mean, he's got to square his political circles as well. And the MAGA are getting increasingly in turmoil. I mean, not just from Epstein. Epstein touches on something, that MAGA, as opposed to just generally American young people, but MAGA people come from a community that generally goes to church. and is conservative in their thinking. And child abuse is just abhorrent. It's just touches, it's another order of horror, so vile that people, cannot just, yes, these people have been told, oh, well, your leaders, congressional leaders and so on, they lie to you, and they have to sort of live with that. They know that politicians lie. They know that they steal. They know that they accumulate lots of money, and they live it. But abusing little children, this is not in that category at all. So that is sort of still there. And just one of the things that happened just before this came up was in Britain, a book came out about Prince Prince Andrew, and it's caused a storm in Britain. It's focused mostly on Prince Andrew's sort of sexual appetites and his financial shenanigans in the book, but it also refers to Trump and Epstein and the connection between the two of them and their maneuvering together mainly about women and about the Princess Diana in particular, who could get there first. So that is, and again, so this comes in now. Trump says, I didn't know Andrew, but there are hundreds of photographs to say that show that he did know Prince Andrew. And Andrew was a fixture in the, in the New York scene. I mean, for people who wanted to sort of rise up in the social hierarchy, a British royal is a sort of, ace card to be able to play. And so, lots of people, including Trump, probably knew him and saw him as a magnet that could draw in other people of interest to them. And then you have Melania launching a lawsuit against the Biden son for suggesting that it was Epstein that introduced Melania to Trump. So again, it's back in the public sphere. And I think, he was going around saying, how do I get rid of this? How do I get from under? How do I get from under Epstein? How do I get from under these people in the Senate who are trying to take control of the Republican Party back? How do I get out from under all of these people? How do I get out from under the deep state, who are going to do their best to destroy me? Well, he sends off Witkoff to Moscow to ask for an urgent meeting with Putin. I think, there have been talks through Belarus for some time before. But as I say, it's not, it's not a blueprint for the political solution. It doesn't say what land will belong to whom or how it's to be achieved. But it is a basic, if you like, intellectual understanding, which is, I'll do the heavy lifting with the Europeans and with as much as I can with these American forces. Putin, just do it. Get on, do it, finish it, and then we can tie up all the details later.
Alastair, when you look at Europe and European leaders, do you think that their priority is the security architecture of the region? Do you see any sort of sign that they're concerned about it?
Yes, I mean, but they see it as simply in a sort of one, optic, Russia. But, do they really see Russia as a threat? Yes, but not in the way in which we think of it. Everyone can work out, Russia has no ability and no interest in invading Europe. And indeed, one of the things that was mooted, I'm not sure that it's in the public domain much, but one of the things that has been said. I don't know that this is from Putin per se, but in those sort of circles saying, yes, we can give security guarantees too. We could change the Russian constitution to prohibit any invasion of Europe. And so we can give security guarantees to Europe. But apart from that, it's pretty obvious. The last thing they want, they've got enough land, they've got enough resources. The last thing they want is to be responsible. They've tried that once before, being responsible for a lot of quarrelsome Europeans. And it's not a good place to be. That was what, led to the end of the Cold War. So, I mean, they remember Czechoslovakia, Prague, all of these things. No, they certainly don't. Do Europeans, and one part of their consciousness, they understand that quite clearly. They also understand that Europe is nowhere and will not be for years in a position to do anything about Russia if it wanted to. So what is it all about? Well, it's all about the fact that the Europeans have really built the whole political project, their whole European, their whole globalist project around the idea of Ukraine, and that Ukraine is a European state, which it isn't, it's a Slavic state, that it is a European state, and that any changes to that threaten the European Union, threaten the European political project. The European political project is fragmenting anyway, but they are now desperate to try and keep it intact. It's like in America, it's a huge slush fund, European Union, of money that circulates, money laundering, money goes back to politicians, back to legislative projects, and so on. There's a huge circulation of money that takes place in Europe, in Brussels, just as in Washington. It's a boondoggle, really. And so they're desperate to keep it going because they know that they are getting further and further severed from their constituents. Their constituency really dislike, I would say, use the word despise the elites, the technocratic elites in Europe. They think they regard the ordinary Europeans with contempt, which they do, and they show contempt back to the elites. Now it's getting to a very serious point where the economy is contracting so severely, and it was very much on the brink, that many Europeans, even middle-class Europeans, are struggling to make ends meet, really struggling. Prices go up. The cost of living in places like the UK and London is just unbearable. And so there's huge tensions. And then there's immigration. And that is the sort of crux of the political crisis that is coming. So Ukraine, where does Ukraine fit into immigration? It doesn't at all. It's immigration that is threatening to blow up the UK. There may well be violence over the summer. Maybe they will get through it. But most of Europe, this has become not just a hot issue, but this has become an existential issue as people lose their jobs. And one of the things that is evident and should be evident everywhere, there aren't good jobs. You can talk to people in their 30s, 35-year-olds. I mean, and let alone for the sort of 22-year-old coming out of university with a blank CV. I mean, and they're saying, and young people are saying, look, we can't even get an internship now because, people say, you got a degree from where? Oh, forget it. I mean, do you think that's going to make me employ you? Have you experience? Let's have a look at your CV. No experience. Okay. You've done no internship? No. And so there really is a problem of getting of jobs. So this is the desperation. Forget about Russia. Forget about Ukraine. Ultimately, of course, it's all dressed up. You know, shout war, war with Russia. We need conscription. We need a big, big army to fight Russia. It's nonsense. The real desperation is because the only thing holding together this European project has been waving the Ukrainian flag and saying Ukraine is part of Europe. And it's artificial because, as DNA shows and as linguistics show, I mean, Ukraine is as much Slavic as Russia is Slavic. It's not a European country, if that make in an obvious way. I mean, there may be different ethnicities in Europe, but it's not, evidently a part of European mainland. So factions are breaking out. The key thing is energy is so costly in Europe. And then von der Leyen, made this abject concession to America that Europe is going to buy liquefied natural gas at about 5 or 6 times the cost of pipeline gas, made the promise to send billions. And at the same time, Europe accepted to impose a 5% tax on all of Europeans to buy American weapons through the industrial complex. So-called, NATO has to make its commitment to the defense of Europe, which comes down to buying 5% of all of our incomes will have to be sent off to the military-industrial complex in the United States as America. Of course, they're going to try and build us build it out in Europe, but I mean, that'll take 20 years to do that sort of change. And Europe is no longer really an industrial center. It is to a certain extent, yes, but to shift that, what you're going to do is Mercedes-Benz going to just produce tanks in the future? I mean, it's not quite so easy, and they're going to do that with debt. And the problem is debt is becoming toxic, becoming a real problem. The fiscal position of Britain, of France, is drastic, really severe. So this is the problem. It's not Russia, it's not Ukraine. It is the fact that Europe is heading into a major recession. Its economies, German economy particularly, is shrinking, but all of Europe is shrinking. And and yes, there's the class of the elites, and they're pretty well untouched by this. If you look at hotels, you look at this holiday season, the really top end, hotels, €1,000 a night or €6,000 a night, they're full. You go after that, most of those are half empty. You look at France, half of the restaurants are half empty. There's certainly something going on. It's the same in all over Europe. Look at the restaurants, half empty. No, I mean, if you go to the Michelin, the fashionable top end where they're all oligarchs sitting there at the table, they're doing well. But it's a tiny little sector, and the rest of it is foundering at the moment. So that's what it's about. It's not really about Russia, except that this is their sort of flag under which they try and, keep their position, to keep a sort of the ability, because, insisting on support for Ukraine is the way of closing down opposition. That and Gaza are the ways they close down opposition. As you will know, Gaza is used absolutely in Britain and in France and in Germany to close down any statements or any criticisms of government action.
Alistair, do you feel that Europe can manage itself without the United States? Because it seems to me the way that they desperately want the continuation of the conflict in Ukraine because they can keep the United States in Europe. They can keep the links between the United States and Europe, and somehow the Ukraine is a motive for them to keep it on and to go on with the plan in Ukraine in order to have the connection between Europe and the United States. They did a lot. You look at the bonds, the treasury bonds of the of the United States. You see the United Kingdom is buying them and just going up. The curve is going up while the Chinese bond is coming down. And what is Europe today? Do they really want to be a powerhouse? Do they really want to be some sort of vassal for the United States? Because it's so much important for the future of Europe. Think of it.
I, I think the optics from the White House in these last days, the line of European, A team sort of sitting on little chairs in the corridor waiting for their turn to speak to the president. I mean, Europe, it's the end. The optic spells the end of the idea that Europe is anything other than sort of a regulatory system of control of a market system, that it doesn't have political power. It's at odds with China. It's at odds with Trump, effectively. They're trying to undo Trump. They're trying to, to pull him back and to impose their will on Trump. And they have no real political weight. They're regarded with contempt by Russia. Russians won't talk to the Europeans at all. And now they've had the example, while they've been spending all this time of not talking to Russia, not dealing with China, look what happens. President of the United States invites Russia to the United States and meets him with full honors there. I mean, makes them look very, very stupid. So no, I don't think it's going to be a political area. But what is worse is that the Europeans are beginning to understand, I think, what the Treasury Secretary, Besant said the other day. He said, we are going to look at Europe as if it was a sort of American sovereign wealth fund. So the Europeans are going to provide the finance for our reindustrialization of America, either by sending the companies there, either the European companies will come, or we are going to use tariffs and other means to make the Europeans reindustrialize America. In other words, it's going to be another form of appropriations, which is not coming through Congress. And they're financing this in very strange ways through these special, either bitcoins and special digital currencies that are not regulated and are going to be quite separate. But this is going to be, a new money supply coming into the United States. So, and many people are buying the stable coins at $1 each, thinking that this is going to, sort of be a good buy. But of course, it's backed up by nothing. The prospectus says, well, yes, we hold some US treasuries as reserves. And that's how these people who sell these stable coins make money, because they take all the interest on the US treasury bills and they give none. The things are just denominated at $1 exactly. And so, it is in effect a Ponzi scheme, because, as soon as people stop buying it or start asking for their money back in dollars and not just in tokens, then these schemes will have to start selling US treasuries, and that's how typically these schemes crash. So America's financial system is not a great deal stronger than the Europeans' financial system. But they, like Rome in the times of the empire, are drawing back into, the capital, the Roman capital, and taking the provinces are going to have to finance Imperial Rome or Imperial Washington. And I doubt, and from all I've just said to you before, you asked me, I mean, the Europeans don't have these resources, really, I think, to do this. As it is, it's creaking under the weight. I mean, put bluntly, the Europeans can't finance themselves at this stage. Literally, they cannot finance themselves. The costs of maintaining the system to which Europeans have become accustomed, the welfare, if you like, safety net, the health services, all of these things have become so costly. And then they have to pay for all these immigrants. And you've seen there's been, riots outside hotels in the UK, finally settled in court the day before, where, there were protests every day against this series of hotels that has been taken over by immigrants, particularly after a small girl was assaulted by one of its inhabitants. And now the courts have said, no, they've all got to go, and the government doesn't know what to do at this stage. So, these are the tensions building and building. But this is the financial reality underlying it. Just as America has found, it can't finance itself as it was. It can't afford, however many military bases around the world and all of these exercises. And they're having to deal with a debt that is a fiscal situation that is out of control, and debt that is growing at the rate of something like 1 trillion every 3 weeks. The interest payments on the debt, not the debt itself, growing much faster. How do they actually manage this? How do they deal with this? They can't. They can't, and nor can Europe. It cannot afford itself any longer. So can it afford America too? Is it going to pay for America's welfare and America's military adventures? That's what they're being asked to do. That's what the message that has come from Bassent and from others, saying, we'll put tariffs on you if you don't comply, or sanction you. And so the tariffs will go to pay off some of our debt. In fact, much of the tariffs will be paid for by Americans. It won't be Europeans necessarily that will be paying those tariffs. There will be a trade-off to a certain extent.